Hello and many thanks for joining us. This is People, Politics and Power. I am Imonia Marire. The much anticipated Anambra governorship election came up on Saturday, November 6, 2021. Unfortunately, it is yet to be done and dusted, as the Americans will put it. This is because the process had been declared inconclusive by the Electoral Management Body, INEC. The Electoral Commission says no election held in Ihiala local government area, one of the 21 local government areas of the state, due to security challenges. Ihiala has 326 polling units with a voting population of over 148,000 persons. This is even as the officially announced result from the remaining 20 local government areas show that only about 241,090 out of the over 2.5 million registered voters turned out to vote on election day. This represents just about 12% or thereabout of the registered voters. INEC has decided to tread the path of caution, ostensibly because the 148,000 plus registered voters in Ihiala local government area are more than half of the declared results so far for all the candidates and more than the total votes recorded by the leading candidate, Professor Charles Soludo of the All Progressive Grand Alliance. That means the election could still go any which way. In the unlikely situation that all the voters in Ihiala decide to exercise their franchise on Tuesday, the day INEC has fixed for a supplementary poll in the local government area. The Anambra election was front-loaded with a lot of anxiety, with concerns and fears, yet it held, albeit with many of the imperfections associated with the conduct of elections in Nigeria. Those who predicted doom were sorely disappointed, as the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, with support from security agencies, made sure the exercise took place as planned, but not without hitches and shortcomings, some of them unexplainable. The reported impressive turnout of voters on election day have not been borne out by the announced figures, in spite of the generally peaceful situation under which the polls were held. And there were still reports of cases or reported cases of voters' inducement, fraud, ballot box snatching, intimidation of electoral officers, compromise of security agents, poor deployment of INEC staff, late arrival of electoral officials and materials to polling stations, amongst other glitches. On the program today, we shall x-ray the electoral process and the actions and inactions or the roles of various agencies, groups and individuals leading up to the eventual outcome of this election and the lessons that may have been learned as the country looks to the Ekiti and Osun governorship elections in 2022 before the big one, that is the 2023 general elections. This is our focus on the program today, a postmortem, so to say, of the Anambra governorship election. Stay with us. After the break, we'll get to meet our guest analysts.
1792 of the Constitution provides for a candidate to secure both the highest number of votes cast and 25% of votes cast in at least 2/3 of the local government areas of the state to be declared the winner of the governorship election. Therefore, It is important to complete the election in Ihiala local government area to make this determination. Clause 47 of the revised regulation and guidelines for the conduct of elections provides that supplementary election shall be conducted where the commission, due to logistical challenges, is unable to deploy on election day. Given the foregoing, it becomes imperative to bring Ihiala local government area at par with the other 20 local government areas in this election before we can make a valid declaration or take any further action based on the extant law.
Right, that was Professor Florence Obi, who was the Chief Returning Officer of the election in Anambra State. By the way, Professor Obi is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Calabar. Now, let's get to meet our guest analysts here in the studio. First, from my far left is Mr. Aya Okeke, former Vice Chairman of the Transition Monitoring Group, TMG. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Also joining us is Victor Aluko. Victor Aluko is a Director, Voter Education and Publicity in the Independent National Electoral Commission. Victor, good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
And last but not the least is Dr. Chima Amadi, a political analyst and Interim Board Chairman, Center for Transparency Advocacy. Thank you so much, Dr. Amadi.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Right. So let me begin with you, Mr. Okeke. The TMG observed the elections. You have also put out what you regard as an interim report or a preliminary report of your observation of this election. What were the high points?
I think for us is to first and foremost commend Anambra people for being able, like you mentioned during your intro, the kind of hype, the kind of fear that was evident or that was, in the atmosphere, but for the people to have exercised their civic responsibility, and even for INEC, for being able to conduct that election as far as they have done, is a very high point for us, irrespective of the other minor incidents that took place.
What would you, how would you categorize those minor incidents?
Yeah, not that, when I say minor incidents, not that they were so minor, because when you still look at issues of violence, issues of electoral fraud, it's still huge, but many people never thought that elections will hold in Anambra State, and it finally did. So that is why I consider them as minor issues, because the big issue would have been that the election never held at all. So for it to have held is a very, very big plus, and I think it is a way to go.
Well, not many people actually thought that there was going to be violence, because Anambra State does not have history of violence during elections. Where this election went ahead all the same, Victor. And of course, since Saturday, there have been issues, one issue or the other raised about the glitches that almost marred the exercise. The BVAS, for instance, was a technological innovation that was brought in, first used in the Soko South by-election, State Assembly by-election, and everyone thought it was going to make the Anambra election smoother and more credible and more transparent. So what happened?
Firstly, INEC is grateful to the people of Anambra State for the understanding they have shown, for cooperating with us, for turning out to vote. If the voters didn't turn out to vote, we wouldn't even be talking about any election. So we are grateful. And we want to say that as a commission, to the best of our ability, given the circumstances we found ourselves, the build up to the election, and the whole event surrounding the 2021 governorship election in Anambra State, I think we managed the process well. And as at now, we were able to actually collate results in 20 out of 21 local government areas. The only one is Ihiala, which we have also announced that by tomorrow we will conduct our election, bring Ihiala at par with the 20 local government areas, conclude the election, announce the winner, and put this behind us. I think as a commission, we did what we should do. But we also recognize that in some areas, in some polling units, we had glitches, technical issues, we had some problems, which largely we tried our best to surmount. And you will agree with me that we deployed to more than 5,000 polling units. It was a massive deployment. I think we actually plan to deploy to 5,634 because the polling units were 5,720. But we told the Anambra people that we will not be deploying to 86 units where we did not allot voters. And of course, we couldn't deploy to here that has 326 units. So when you remove that from 5,634, we were able to deploy to about 5,350 or so. And that's a major deployment. And where we had problems were a fraction of all those units. And what the good thing was that at the height of the whole issue, the Resident Electoral Commissioner came out to speak to the people, to shift the election, to shift the close of poll from 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. And we also told the people of Anambra that all those who were on the queue as at 4 p.m. would be allowed to vote. And they were able to vote. I think, given the circumstances and the situation generally, INEC managed the process well.
We will come back to that management of the process because Anambra as a state is small compared to if and when we are going to have a general election in 2023 that will involve all 36 states and the FCT. Is a bigger burden and a more complex situation. But Dr. Chima, as a political analyst, I first want to get your general overview of what happened in Anambra on Saturday and thereafter.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You see, first of all, I'll start by saying that my problem with government agencies, especially this INEC, is a lack of effective communication. And because of that lack of effective communication, it opens up rooms for narratives that obscure reality. Here is, with due respect to him, the Director of Information, and I would expect that given the narrative out there, if you solve media and then if you ask the person who is not on the ground but who is depending on information available on non-conventional channels, he will tell you that the Anambra election was a failure on the part of the commission. But that is not, and this is a very good opportunity for the commission to put out facts out there. See, first of all, you need to put proper context to the election. We had an election in Anambra State where hell literally was promised because of the various issues, the separatist movements and all that. There was attempts to ensure that there was no election on that day. You had another election where, for the first time in the history since 1998, the Director General of the NYSC personally came to the field because he was afraid that the NYSC, ad hoc staff that was deployed will perhaps run away. So he came to inspire confidence. That is to show you the level and extent of fear within the people. Why? Because even before now, ad hoc staff has started withdrawing en masse. INEC has to face the issue of withdrawal. On the day of election, even people who have been brought in to replace those who have withdrawn, on that day that have been trained on how to operate this equipment, they also withdrew. But irrespective of this, talk about even an attempt by transporters on that day who were afraid genuinely. Some of them could not, you mentioned issues of late deployment and all that. This is because of transporters who were afraid for their livelihoods. Yes, we can do the INEC job today and get paid today. But what happens tomorrow if our vehicles are burnt or if we die? So they refuse to go. Sometimes we need to put this into context. It was against this backdrop of fear that the election was conducted. Now, let us go to the issue, because everybody, even the one that is born today, is talking about beavers. what actually happened on the day. And, you know, sometimes when some of our colleagues in the civil society organization put out narratives, you tend to think that there's an agenda, that no matter what the commission does, there will always be somebody out there who thinks, oh, this is wrong. In 2019, comrade, you will recall that the same civil society said that the smart card reader use only succeeded, I think, 19% success. Now, I'm seeing reports from some civil society organizations saying that beavers succeeded for 60%. As a father, if my child goes for an election and had 90% in the first try and comes back with 60% in the second try, I think that that child has done well. There's an improvement. But even that 60% is not even true. Now, INEC deployed in, according to what the director here said, 5,300 and something units. As at this late last night, the beavers had uploaded 4,987 results from polling units. A little mass will tell you that is 88.5% success rate from the beavers alone. Is it possible that those who wanted to game the system and could not game the system because of the deployment of technology are the ones shouting louder than others? Let me explain to you that the best technological deployment, the worst technological deployment, I bet to say, is better than the best manual deployment accreditation of election. Don't forget that Anambra is notorious for turning out fantastic figures when it comes out. If you remember in 2011, Anambra had over 80% voters turnout. But with the introduction of technology, that number is reducing because the reality is coming to play. Also, if you remove the 86 units where there was zero allocation, and remove local government.
It has 326.
We are getting close to 92% performance of the beavers. In anything, there will be glitches. Comrade, how many times have you in AIT here called somebody on live interview and internet failed and you said our audience will connect? These things depend on internet technology. Sometimes the technology will fail. Technologies fail, especially those that is as new as this. Somebody said, was it tried? It was tried in the Isoko by-election. It returned 97.4% in terms of success rate. So the argument here is this. Most of those who are driving this narrative, especially from my own constituency, there's an agenda here. And the agenda may not be far-fetched from the fact that some of these people perhaps think they can do better than the commission is doing. Anambra election, given the background I've said, was a hugely successful election in terms of deployment of man and resources, in terms of performance of the technology. Yes, there were glitches, but the commission was on top of the situation and made allowance for those glitches by extending the time of voting. And so today, you are seeing for the first time in Anambra that even the returning officer cannot make a call. Before in Anambra, by now we already know the winner because we've already allocated votes. So right now we want to also applaud the Anambra people and the Nigerian police for conducting themselves above par in terms of the peacefulness. But we've always known that Anambra man can go to war for any other thing except elections. He can go to war for his business, he can go to war for, but then when it comes to elections, they have a way of comporting themselves. They would rather go to the courts than go to war with anybody. So the task now is, how do we improve upon what has come to stay? And that is the technology that's been deployed. Those identified challenges, how do we ensure that going to an Osun state, that those gaps can close, rather than sitting down here and condemning a commission that is one of the very few agencies that is doing all it can to improve, to have incremental improvement in these processes.
Victor, Dr. Amadi has done a huge chunk of your work for you, but I'm still going to come to you on this. Now, the deployment of the beavers, there were issues about whether or not those who were trained initially pulled out at the last minute. So it may just have been a combination of the technology and the personnel here. Now, did the commission anticipate this kind of situation? And if it did, what were the contingency plans that were put in place to make sure that at least there was an appreciable level of functionality of the beavers?
Actually, the way we recruit presiding officers as presiding officers online, and you may be surprised, pleasantly surprised, that when we had stakeholders forum, and the representative of the DG of NYC was there, he announced that they themselves were surprised at the number of youth corpers that decided to register online, because registering online is willful. It's not forced. So willful desire to participate in the election. So we had a lot of NYC people who wanted to participate, but as the tension heightened,
were they mainly from Anambra? I mean, people, NYC members who were serving Anambra, or even from outside the state.
Anambra, as the tension heightened, of course, naturally, you had parents who were scared and were like telling the children to be careful, and so we experienced some withdrawal. Then we were able to pull from neighboring states, from Enugu, from Delta, and we had numbers. But then, the type of situation we experienced, the head of the transition monitoring, my colleague gave a good explanation of the whole thing. But as a commission, our job was to monitor the staffing problem and react to it. When the returning officer was speaking, she said something. She talked about security threats that led to logistics and staffing constraints. That was like a few words to describe a big problem. But the thing is that we had also so many staff of INEC, permanent staff of INEC on ground. We also deployed our staff massively. So we envisaged.
And were those permanent staff trained in the use of this
new technology? Yes, they were supervisory presiding officers. So they were also able to monitor. And a ward is not a registration area, which people call ward. It's not really so big like that. It's a place you can even move on foot up and down, monitoring, supervising, and trying to ensure that things actually work well. For the beavers, we expect that any technology you deploy to the field, even if you are deploying it for the 10th time, there will still be glitches, because every technical equipment can have issues anytime. But when you are going for such an assignment, you envisage that a particular percentage may have issues, and we actually planned for those issues. It may interest you to note that software for the beavers was developed by our own in-house engineers. And that was why it was easy for them as voting began, as things began to unfold on the field, it was easy for them to go to those places, upgrade the software which they themselves developed ab initio. And we were able to make voters vote in many of those places. In the polling unit, where one of the leading candidates was to vote, and he was on TV complaining, and he was saying he will not leave. Of course, at the end of the day, he was able to vote. Everybody in that unit voted. And so in many other places, people voted. And the relative peace and the sort of quiet environment we're witnessing in Anambra now is a reflection of the fact that people actually voted. And maybe it's all for my colleagues to analyze further, that the will of the people was respected.
With the benefit of hindsight now, do you think that maybe the commission should have had a backup situation to the beavers?
Of course we have.
Yes.
Are you talking about incidents form?
Where incidents form had been abolished with the beavers.
We buried incidents form a long time ago because it was abused. It was abused. Incident form was abused, and we even had community collusions in terms of use of smart card reader. You saw situations where people were compromised in certain communities. Even when the smart card reader was working well, they will say it was not working well, so that they will use incident forms. And of course, how do you ensure one man, one vote? At this level, this is 2021. 61 years ago, we had independence. We should move away from all these voting by proxy, impersonation, one man having 5 voters cards, one man voting 10 times, going from one place to the other within the registration area, voting and boasting that he has voted here, he has voted here, he has voted here. So when we were using the smart card reader, apart from the fact that we had problem with the use of the incident forms, we also had a lot of problems with the very authentication of thumbprints. And many people said they were farmers, and so their thumbprints could not be verified. And what will we do? You know, so we went back after all those actions, and we decided to design a system that will make us verify a second biometric feature. So if we verify your thumbprint and it didn't work, we verify your face. And we kept telling people that if your face cannot be verified, it means the correct situation must be that you forgot your face at home, and then you are not the owner of that card.
Were there any situation in this election where an individual could not be authenticated, could not be verified either by the fingerprint or by the facial recognition?
There was.
Yeah.
And those people were politely told to go home. Politely told to go home.
So
and of course,
they were told to go home and bring their faces.
If someone brought another person's PVC, you know in your heart, you know it's not your own. And so if you try to use it and will catch the person by saying, this is not your own, the person will just quietly melt into the crowd and go home.
Mr. Okeke, let's shift attention to the turnout for these elections. On election day, the impression that was given was that the turnout was good, was large. In fact, there were reports to the extent that we're saying people were on the queue 1 hour before the opening of polls. People were on the queue, old and young people were on the queue for several hours waiting for INEC officials and materials to arrive. And the impression one got from this end was that, oh, there was going to be a very large turnout of voters. But at the end of the day, INEC is saying so far, without Ihiala, 241,090 persons came out to vote. And out of that number, 7,841 votes were rendered invalid. Now, the question is, there are two questions here. One is that, is the voters register in Anambra State authentic? The 2.5 million registered voters, is it authentic? Two is, was there not enough voter education done? Not just by INEC, the political parties, and even civil society before this election to bring out these people to come out and vote?
Yeah, I think the beavers can be a yardstick to begin now to measure the authenticity of even the voters register. Yes, I mean, even if you look at the circumstances in Anambra prior to the election, there was a high level of tension. And definitely, we can assume that some people stayed away and did not come out to exercise their franchise. But having said that, like I said earlier, for you to have about 200,000 people within the circumstances that we were facing in Anambra to come out and vote is still a plus, although it is a very, very insignificant number. Whether in civil society or general, every other person, you know, did a lot of voter education. People were aware that elections will hold in Anambra on 6th of November. People were aware the candidates for the elections. But like I said, there is a problem. I have always personally looked at that has been a very huge problem of our actual voting population. Because you can even see there was something that was going on that one particular candidate for the election scored almost during the primaries, almost double of what happened at the general election. How did it happen? How are those figures, how do they all come up? I think with these beavers, we can now begin to understand the actual number of registered voters. I don't know to the extent that INEC can begin to match, do a simulation to begin to look at the voters' cards, to begin to see whether there are two fingerprints that are appearing with different names on the voters' register, to begin to see whether there is a mechanism which their engineers can bring forth, to begin to see whether identical faces with the same fingerprints can appear in multiple forms on a voter's register, and to begin to eliminate those numbers, and for us to now have an authentic voters register. Because for me personally, I think there is the issue of the number of voters register has always been on the high side. Right from 1999 up to date, you keep on seeing figures, millions of people that have registered for elections, but during election day, we don't cross, I don't think we've even reached a 30% voting population, even with the incident forms, double thumb printing, using palm kernel to put on top of ballot papers that we have seen in the past. So there is a need for INEC to do more work in terms of the voters register, for us to now have an authentic register which can now begin to place side by side the number of people that are now casting their vote. Otherwise, we keep on having a high turnover, a high number in the voters register, and have lesser and lesser number of people that actually vote. So they say there's still a problem within that cycle, which I think INEC has run up.
So you are suggesting, therefore, that INEC may need to do another clean-up of the voters register.
Definitely.
And this will not just be in Anambra State.
Everywhere. Yeah,
everywhere.
Yes.
Because like you said, the figures over time indicate that we have never crossed, or maybe on one or two occasions crossed, the 35% threshold in terms of voter turnout nationally. All the time.
And those voters turnouts were you can still be suspect. Can still be suspect because with incidence forms and the issue of card readers not working and people are doing things manually, those 35% are still in question. So we need to really find out how many people are registered as voters in Nigeria and how many people are voting.
All right, we'll go on a short break. When we return, we'll be looking at the political culture in Anambra State and how it has impacted this election. And of course, I'll be taking up Dr. Chima Amadi on what should be the responsibility of civil society in situations like this. Is it limited to just observing and monitoring elections on election day, or do they have a responsibility to also contribute to the political education of the... Thank you so much for staying with us, Dr. Chima Amadi. The issue of the political culture in Anambra State, we have had a discussion around it before, but on a very limited basis. But now is the time to do another assessment of that political culture in Anambra State. There's so much hype, there's so much noise pre-election, but on election day, everybody seems to melt back into their homes. And I need you to take that alongside or side by side with the whole question of the responsibility that civil society groups have. Is their responsibility limited to just monitoring and observing elections on election day or a week or two before election? Should they do a lot more than they are doing at the moment to conscientize voters in the various places where they are going to monitor and observe elections?
First, let us put it out there that turnout of voters in the system, our own electoral system, is immaterial. Once you meet the constitutional safeguards, it is first to cross the line. And what the constitutional safeguards, if you meet, I think 25% to a third of it is first to cross the line. Now, for us, it's an aberration where registered voters 2.something million, and then less than 10% of that number determine who. But there are issues. Don't forget that this election, and all of us here have agreed that this election is not just it's an unusual election. I stand to be corrected. No political party had a very deep campaign in Anambra because of the fears. Many times they were out there, they were attacked by the now notorious or known or gun men. So nobody really campaigned in the proper sense of the word. Some even had to leave. I mean, one of the candidates had to go to, I think, Lagos State one of those trade centers in Lagos. In an election in Anambra, you were campaigning in
there were not just one. There were about 3 or 4 of them went to Alaba Market, to Oshodi.
Because they were clearly afraid. Nobody, in fact, the mere fact of putting any insignia, any party insignia, it put you in danger. This was the climb under which, people were, and then you now talk about mobilizing gunboats, helicopters, and all that for receiving. If you are a human being that wants to be alive, will you want to risk it in that kind of situation? But then, also looking at it deeply, you will see that the art, and that is what my colleague is trying to put, the art of manipulating the voter register has always been there over time. What INEC has been doing this time is just to find a way of cleaning up. To start a new voter register now is going to go up the nation hundreds of billions of naira. So in the last election, for example, the continuous voters registration process that INEC had in Anambra, they registered 138,000 and some fractions new registered voters, right? Guess what? When Beavers was imputed to clean up, about 68,000 of the 138,000 were all fake. Double registration, Amana pictures, rubbish. So INEC had to drop that 68,000. So you had about 86,000 or so, if my math is correct, registered voters. Now that is just for one circle, is one continuous voter circle. The main 2.5 million, if you put it under the crucible, I assure you that there will be a lot of numbers that will be thrown out of that place. Also, juxtapose the fact that Anambra is a unique state. And I had cause to say this the last time. These continuous voter registration processes take place during weekday when our brothers and sisters are in their various trade centers. They are in OP worker. They are in, the different trade centers trading. On election day, they are at their home. And remember, in our laws, you only vote from where you are registered. So by the time you go home, you can no longer vote. And there's no movement for you to go to the trade center or the shop where you registered. So that on its own has disenfranchised a lot of people because they can't vote. So what do? They resort to playing football at home or just relaxing. That is Anambra State for you. Now, when we get to a stage where you can vote from wherever, and then it's also subject to abuse because you will see a situation where vehicles are moving people from one polling booth to another to vote, and that is why there's a restriction on where you can vote. Then for the civil society, you see, sometimes civil society takes to take a lot of flack. But the incremental success that INEC has had over the years is because of impulse of civil society. Because after all this is done, civil society organizations will put in their reports. Some of them, they will hand over the report to INEC, who will study this. There will be stakeholder meetings where this will come and will talk. Some of these things are carried along in the electoral amendment processes, even in the process of deploying technology. Technology was the brainchild of civil society that constantly shouted that we need to bring technology. And also I want to praise INEC for having a homegrown technology. Like I was saying, this technology was developed by the ICT unit. It is not from any China or any America, from the ICT unit of INEC, who haven't taken a look at the challenges, the peculiar challenges of our nation in terms of election, developed this technology. And that was why it was easy for them to quickly do whatever they had to do. But guess what? Rather than praising the ICT, guess what? Just 30 minutes into the election, there was already a viral news asking that the head of ICT of INEC should be fired. And that is the kind of challenge we have here. This is somebody you should praise for saving us billions in exchange in dollar exchange that we don't have to develop things like this. We should look at the way of deepening it now. So for the civil society and some of our colleagues who want to ride with this narrative of nothing is happening, they should be very careful, because what is the alternative? The alternative is returning us back to the incident forms, returning us back to those days when people were still on queues and a result has been announced. We need to stick with technology. Yes, there will be glitches. Yes, there will be issues. And there's no situation is perfect. Even in America, as we talk, the Americans are still looking at their system, the electoral system, in terms of the deployment of technology from the last election. They're still looking at it. It's an ongoing process. So civil society should remember that we are all stakeholders and we are partners in this. Our report should be guided, our report should be objective and not due to any agenda because of our own peculiar interests.
Victor, we need to look at the few cases or incidents of ballot box snatching that took place during this election, and how the deployment of technology is impacting on that. Now, what would be the purpose of snatching a ballot box at this point in time, knowing that at the end of the day, you cannot upload such results into the INEC result viewing portal, for instance? But it did happen. You know, and then there were also a few cases of voter inducement, even inducement of security personnel were reported.
Actually, we had very few insignificant cases of ballot box snatching. And I can say those who still went and snatched ballot boxes, they were living in the past. They didn't really understand that if you snatch ballot boxes, there's no way you can bring any result into the system. Or maybe they were snatching the ballot box to destroy the votes in an opponent's base. You know, there are various reasons for wanting to do all these things. Maybe snatching ballot box to destroy the number of votes your opponent is going to have in his own base, or maybe to snatch ballot box so that you'll be able to bring in your own written result later into the system. All those ones did not work because the places where the ballot boxes were snatched, we just cancelled those results. The law supports it, that where you have such violence, you can cancel the result. And the presiding officer there will only fill for missing 40G. That is to report that no election successfully took place there.
Well, if that's the case, those
it's very insignificant.
Whose intention was to disenfranchise or, well, so to say, if their intention was to wound the opponent, would have succeeded?
Very insignificant. But let me tell you, there's still a valid requirement for anybody to be declared winner. At the end of the day, we will still look at the margin of lead. At the end of the day, when the returning officer is doing the final collation, there will be a margin of lead. If the person who is leading, if the difference between the vote between that person and the next person is less than the total number of cancelled votes and all those, something will still be done. So nobody can succeed in injuring another person's base. You know, those things used to happen before, and that was why people were talking about INEC inconclusive, all this, because we were going back to ensure that we satisfied everyone that there was fairness in the system, and that anybody who sponsored talks to destroy an opponent's area was really doing that in vain. You know.
Now tell us a little bit more about the decision now to hold the supplementary elections in Ihiala. Ihiala is a whole local government.
It's a whole local
326 polling units.
That's massive.
And of
with
course, over 148,000 registered voters in that place. Now, looking at the margin of lead at this point in time, why is it important to hold the supplementary election in Ihiala?
Currently, the margin of lead is 52,624 votes between the leading candidate and the next person. And with 148,000 votes plus outstanding, we don't know what will happen. As a commission, our job is to provide the platform for voters in Ihiala to come out and vote. If they all vote for one person, if they share their votes, the vote as they like. We'll tally the whole thing at the end of the day. We add the votes to what we already have, and then we'll see what happens. But we assure the people of Anambra that we'll be deploying massively this time around to Ihiala. Many of our staff, permanent staff, we did not allow them to return to their bases. We kept them there so that we will be able to move in massively to Ihiala. We're going to monitor every fly that flies in Ihiala, and we're going to ensure that the will of the people in that local government prevails at the end.
The chief returning officer talked about security challenges that prevented the election from holding in Ihiala, but didn't go further than explaining what the security issues were.
We said security threats.
Yes, that's
manifested in staffing problems and logistics constraints. Our words were carefully chosen.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
What is the nature of the security threats? This time around, you see, INEC does not control issues of security. This time around, We expect the police to ensure that there is no single security threat. This time around, the security agencies, we expect them to ensure that there is no single security threat. For only one local government, there should not be any security threat this time around.
Mr. Okeke, we are looking forward to the Ekiti and Osun governorship elections before the big one in 2023. What lessons do you think
FCT.
we have learned?
In FCT.
FCT.
The FCT is next.
FCT is
area council.
Area council. Yes.
In February.
In February.
It's
okay.
as big. It's as big as FCT is bigger than some states. So
Okay.
it's a major election.
So what lessons do you think we can take, we can learn from the Anambra situation now that we can push over to making FCT, Ekiti, and Osun much better?
Thank you so much. I think so many lessons. One is to go back to the beavers. We have tried it in Delta. We have tried it in Anambra. Is to begin to look at what were the low points of the beavers. I think learning those lessons will help. And for civil society organizations, is for us to, increase our voter education around this new technology, because this new technology has not been used in those places. What did we see? What are the things that they should look out for? Let them already know ab initio that if you are having a fake voter's card, there's no need for you to go to the polling booth because you are not going to vote. It will help us to even begin to curtail the issues of malpractices. And also, let us also begin to let people know that the days of even buying of votes, telling, vote buying has to be curtailed. And also for the security agencies to begin to look at what has happened in Anambra. Yes, Anambra may not be as massive in terms of, Ekiti and Osun may not be as massive as issues around Anambra or the southeast. In the southwest, there are still issues of separatism. So how do we begin to ensure that people don't use what has happened in Anambra and probably some parts of the southeast to begin, politicians don't use it to come and start creating problems in the southwest. But generally, I think one of the biggest lessons is to ensure that more and better civic and voters education is carried out in the southwest, Ekiti, Osun, and even in the FCT, so that people begin to understand this new technology and begin to know how they can apply them.
Dr. Amadi, lessons learned and how to apply them?
For me, the lessons are numerous. So, and every agency will have to pick its own lesson. Whether you talk about the political actors as agencies, or the INEC itself, security organizations, political parties, and even the people. The issues of vote buying reared up its ugly head again.
It did.
But then, why is it rearing up its head? Because a loophole has been closed. Before now, nobody cared about the voting public, because you either make friends with somebody who knows somebody in INEC and then you are announced without even going through the process, or you cut away ballot boxes, or you do whatever it takes. But now, those have been shut down. INEC has become slowly very, very irrelevant on election day. They put out, that's how it should be. You put out the processes out there, let people go vote. And then the era of cutting away ballot boxes is no more. So the politician is now approaching the average voter. And so the power of the average voter has increased. So which leading to the monetization of the ballots. So people are now buying more. But then it now behoves on individuals, not just civil society, even community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, to begin to harp more on the dangers of selling your franchise. It is 1,000 naira today, like in Anambra, it went as high as 3,000. But don't forget that there is another 4 years where the person you've taken 3,000 naira from is going to determine what happens to you. Then the issue of securitization of elections. You could get away with that in Anambra State because it's a one-off election. You may even get away with it in Ekiti State, in FCT, and then in Osun, it's a one-off election. But you will never get away with it in 2023. Because how many security officers do we have? They combine strength of all this military, and police and NSCDC. If you spread them, you won't even have up to 10,000 deployment in each state in
February 2023.
You won't get that. So what that tells you is that why don't we address the main issues that are causing this, heightened security? And that is the issues of what? The separatism, which you must have to discuss head on. The issues of banditry, you have to talk about them. The criminalities that are going on, the state needs to take a conscious decision that it needs to go in neck deep and address these issues, so that on election day you don't have to spend so much to securitize the system. And then INEC on its own. Yes, some of us are saying you have done well, but you can do better. How do you deepen the technology? How do you transit from having these consistent issues of logistical nightmares? For example, deployment. In 2021, we should not be talking about late deployment because you are waiting for A and B. I understand the argument. INEC, because of the security issues, INEC cannot move if the police does not move. But that is where you have a lack of synergy. Every time INEC is having meetings, they call the ISS, where you meet the security men. But on election day, what happens? You have policemen going to wait at the police stations. Some of them are maybe even hanging around various government houses looking for what to get. While your main duty to escort, sensitive and non-sensitive materials and personnel, you leave it there. And then INEC will not put his staff at risk. So they need to have ways of discussing with the higher echelon of the security operatives on what to do about this, because it is becoming an embarrassing situation where voting is supposed to start by 8 o'clock, and by 10 o'clock there is still no INEC official because they are waiting for security personnel. So these are issues we need to address as we move through to FCT, to Ekiti, and to Osun State. And then for the media itself, I think the media also need to play a very important role. And this role does not even stop at information dissemination alone, but even education. Education for all parties. When are we going to start calling out political actors? Because these are the culprits. We need to start also calling them out on the nefarious activities that they're carrying out to undermine the system. I rest my case.
Victor, one final word here. There was a situation where one of the INEC officials actually reported that he was threatened, he was intimidated with the use of thugs and forced to sign election results that he said were not authentic.
That was Orumba
North, yes.
That scenario, we witnessed that scenario yesterday at the collation center when there was some rumble between the collation officer and the electoral officer. Whatever the rumble was, we were not on ground, on the field to witness what actually happened. But I know that now that we are going to finish the whole process, there will definitely be a way to download from them what actually happened. And we'll get to the bottom of it.
So there is supposed to be a further interrogation of that process?
Yes, we need to know.
And to mitigate...
we used to know why such strong words were used by the two of them against each other. We need to know.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. Mr. Anya Okeke is a former vice chairman, Transition Monitoring Group, joining us here on the program. Thank you so much for your time. Victor Aluko is the director, Voter Education and Publicity at the Independent National Electoral Commission. Thank you for coming on the program. And of course, Dr. Chima Amadi. He is a political analyst and interim board chairman, Center for Transparency Advocacy. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. And to you, our viewers out there, we want to thank you for investing your time with us. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of